There's a question I want to ask you today. Not about your strategy, not about your next move, not about what you should be doing differently. Something deeper than that. At some point in your career, maybe right now, you find yourself in a place that's hard to describe. You've been building something. Maybe it's taking your company from good to great. Maybe it's growing your own business. Or maybe it's just advancing in your career. Your reputation, solid. People look to you, depend on you, and still something doesn't sit right. Not enough to call it a crisis, not clear enough to do anything about it. Just a hum. A question that keeps surfacing in the quiet moments. On the drive home, the early morning before anyone else is up. The end of a meeting that went fine, but left you feeling something you couldn't name. Most people just push through it. Add more, move faster, find a new goal to aim at. But what if the hum isn't a problem to solve? What if it's a question asking to be heard? And what if the question underneath all of it, the one you haven't quite let yourself ask, is this? Who told you that? That's a question we're going to sit with for a while today. Here's what I've noticed. Not just in my own story, but in nearly every conversation I've had with leaders who've built something but are now wondering what comes next. We carry things that we never chose to carry. Beliefs about what success is supposed to look like. Definitions of what a good leader sounds like. Assumptions about what we're capable of and what we're not. And most of the time, we don't question any of it. We just carry it. It doesn't come in like a flood. It just accumulates. A comment someone made early in your career that still surfaces from time to time. An expectation that came with a previous role that still lingers. A story you started telling yourself during a hard season that you never updated when the season changed. Over time, those things stop feeling like inputs. They start feeling like the truth. Not because they're true, but because they've been there long enough that questioning them feels like you're questioning yourself. And here's where it gets complicated. Most of us who are in that in-between place, between what we built and what we sense we're built for, are doing something very human. We're looking back while trying to move forward, while being completely stuck in the middle. And in that looking back, we find things. Beliefs, patterns, definitions that shape decisions we're still living inside of. So the question isn't whether those things are there. They're there. The question is what you do with them when you find them. I've sat across from enough leaders in this exact place to know it usually goes one of three ways. The first is not evaluating. You see it. You feel it. You even name it to yourself in a quiet moment. And then you keep moving. Because evaluating feels like stopping. And stopping feels dangerous when you've built a life around forward motion. But here's what you're missing when you don't stop. The tension you're feeling right now, that hum, could be the most valuable data you've ever had. It's not a warning light. It's information. And every day you walk past it is a day you're squandering the one thing that could actually move you from where you are to where you sense you're meant to be. The second is accepting and moving forward. This one is more subtle, and honestly, it's more dangerous because it looks like growth. You did the reflection, you looked at the belief, and you sat with it. Then you accepted it and you kept on building. But what you built forward on were last season's inputs. Maybe not even truths. Just things that had been there long enough to feel like foundation. And now you're in a new season, standing on something that was never examined closely enough to know if it actually holds. The third is the wondering. Now that you know, what now? The wondering isn't weakness. The wondering is the signal. And ignoring it isn't neutral. It's a choice. And it has a cost that compounds over time. In a distillery, before whiskey gets made, before heat is applied in the still, and before any separation happens, there's a room. You walk into it and the first thing you notice is the smell. Grain, water, something fermented and alive. It's not the smell of whiskey, not yet. It's the smell of everything that goes in to become the whiskey, if the right things go in and the right questions get asked. Distillers call the raw ingredients the mash bill. Grain, water, yeast, all assembled before the process begins. And here's what many people don't realize about the whiskey making. The distiller just doesn't pour everything in and let the process sort it out. The distiller stands at the mash bill and asks a question. Does this belong? Not, is this grain any good? Not, is this what we used the last time? Does this belong in what we are trying to make? Because the still is powerful. The process is remarkable. But you cannot distill your way out of a mash bill. Whatever goes in will come out the other side. The distiller knows this, and so they are careful, intentional. They examine what's going in before the heat is ever applied. That's the work. It's the same work that's sitting in front of us when we find ourselves in that in-between. Not how do I move forward faster, but what am I actually building on? What went into my mash bill that I never stopped to examine? And does it still belong in what I'm becoming? I'm going to be a little raw with you right now. I grew up with a speech impediment. I still have it. Still work hard to get certain words out. And somewhere early, not in one moment, but in the way that things accumulate when you're young, I learned something. I learned to read a room before I spoke, to measure the distance between what I wanted to say and whether it was worth the risk of saying it. I learned which moments were safe and which ones weren't. I learned to make myself smaller in rooms that felt uncertain. Not because anyone sat me down and told me to. Just because that's what you learn when something about you becomes the thing other people notice first. The career I built made sense. Strategy, marketing, ideas. Things that didn't require me to stand somewhere exposed and trust what came out would be received. For most of my life, I accepted this as true. I never asked who told me that. I just carried it. I want to stop here for a moment. I'm not telling you this so you can understand speech impediments. I'm telling you this because you probably know exactly what I'm describing. Not the impediment, but the calculation. The moment you decided it wasn't worth the risk. The version of you that made smaller so something wouldn't happen. Maybe it was the classroom. Maybe it was in a boardroom. Maybe it was at a dinner table where the wrong thing said had consequences you'd learned to avoid. You made the calculation. And somewhere along the way, that calculation became the belief. And then the belief became the floor. and you built on it, without ever asking, who told you that? Here's what happened on my end. I spent most of my career in marketing. Sony, Bridgestone, nearly 2 decades inside one company. Long enough to know that somewhere along the way, it stopped being what I did, and it became who I was. And the voice that kept me there just kept saying, this is your lane. Stay in it. You're good at this. But here's what I didn't examine closely enough for a very long time. Every strategy conversation I had eventually became a different conversation. Leaders would close the door, lower their voice, and ask something that had nothing to do with the campaign. It was always about the gap. The gap between what they'd built and what they sense they were built for. I wasn't just good at marketing. I was good at finding the identity question underneath the business problem. I just didn't have language for it yet. And who told me my lane was the strategy? Well, everyone, including me, for 30 years. It turns out the lane was wider than I thought. And I'm doing it with my voice. Not because the impediment went away, but because I stopped letting it be attached to my identity. And here's what I didn't expect. When you step into what you were built for, when you stop accepting the limitations that were handed to you and start carrying forward what was actually given to you, other people hear something. Leaders I never would have reached, conversations that never would have happened, people sitting somewhere right now who needed to hear something that only gets said when you stop letting the wrong thing define your ceiling. That's not a speaking story. That's what happens when identity gets distilled down to what's actually true. And it started with one question. Who told me that was mine to carry? Here's what I believe about identity. And I want to say this carefully because I think it changes how you hold this conversation. Your identity isn't something you create. It isn't a personal brand, and it isn't a performance that you refine over time. It isn't the accumulated sum of what other people told you, what was true about you. Your identity is something you were given, something you were built to carry forward. And the work, the real work, isn't invention. It's curation. Standing at your own mash bill and asking, does this belong? Is this actually true? Or did it just arrive enough to feel like it's always belonged? You were given something to tend, not to reinvent, not to perform, not to defend, to tend, to distill down what's actually true and carry that forward. So that question, who told you that? It isn't an act of deconstruction. It isn't pulling a thread that unravels everything. It's the distiller standing at the mash bill before the heat is applied and asking, does this belong in what I'm becoming? That's not a crisis. That's faithfulness to who you were actually built to be. And here's where it goes beyond you. Because as a leader who hasn't asked that question doesn't keep the unexamined beliefs to themselves. They pour them into the mash bill of the culture around them, into the decisions that never get questioned, into the way things have always been done, and into the answer to the why that nobody can actually answer. Trace it back far enough and you'll usually find something was never examined, just accepted and passed forward. The distiller's work isn't just personal. It's what makes the next thing worth what it takes to build it. If you've ever gone to a whiskey tasting, you write down what stands out, what you want to remember, and what you don't want to lose when you leave the room. These are mine from today. Yours might be different. The first, the tension you're feeling in the in-between isn't a problem. It's information. The hum underneath the success, the question that surfaces on the drive home, well, that's probably the most valuable data you've had in a long time. Don't walk past it. The second, not everything in your mash bill was put there by you. Some of it arrived early and stayed long enough to feel permanent. The question isn't whether those things are there, because they are. The question is whether you've ever picked them up and asked if they actually belong. The third, your identity isn't something you build. It's something you were given to tend to and to carry forward. The work is curation, honest, careful, unhurried, not construction. You're not starting over. You're distilling down to what's actually true. And the last one, who told you that is not a destructive question. It's a faithful one. Asked carefully, it doesn't pull things apart. It reveals what was always true underneath and what was just accumulated. These tasting notes are available as a free download at craftedclarity.net, and you don't have to log in to get them. We started today with a question. Not about your strategy, not about your next move. Something deeper. Who told you that? And I want to leave you with this. The most dangerous thing about an unexamined belief is that it can become the floor that you're standing on. And if you build on it, season after season, never asking whether it was true, whether it was actually yours, whether it belongs in what you're becoming. The distiller doesn't do that. The distiller stands at the mash bill before anything goes in and asks a question out of faithfulness to what they're trying to make. You were built for something. Not the version of you that accumulated other people's definitions over decades of forward motion. The version that has always been there, underneath the performance, underneath the title, underneath the strategy and the reputation and the role. That version doesn't need to be invented. It needs to be distilled. And it starts with one honest question. Who told you that? And in all of it, remember, clarity isn't found. It's crafted. Thanks for listening to Crafted Clarity. If you're a leader wrestling with the tension between success and significance, or if you're trying to align your work with a deeper calling, I'd love to connect with you. If your organization is facing questions about strategy, whether it's alignment, ROI, or building confidence in your team, this is the work we do every day at iBrand. And if you walk this journey yourself, or maybe you're right in the middle of it, I'd love to hear your story and maybe even share it here on the podcast. You can find me at craftedclarity.net.